Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats. But we aren't looking for your ordinary culprits. We are investigating the unseen world right under our noses, inside our homes, and all across our properties. Now get this. Did you know that out of the roughly 1 million species of insects identified so far, less than 1% are actually considered pests to humans, pets, or crops? Seriously, less than 1%. The vast majority of insects are incredibly beneficial. They're our pollinators, our predators, nature's very own recycling crew. So when a client calls in a pro with a bug problem, properly identifying the insect isn't just a wild guess. It is absolute, rigorous detective work. Misidentifying a pest? Well, that can lead to the wrong treatment, wasted money, and a totally unnecessary environmental impact. So let's jump right into this and learn exactly how the pros solve these tiny mysteries.
So, here is our game plan for today. First up, we're going to meet the suspects. Then, we'll take a look at spiders, ticks, and relatives. From there, we'll shift gears into integrated pest management, followed by precision targeting and tools. And finally, we're going to put our brand new skills to the test with a deep dive case study on termites.
All right, Section 1, Meet the Suspects, focusing on basic entomology. Let's get into it.
Okay, think of this as the biological blueprint of our primary suspects. By definition, insects are invertebrates. That means they don't have backbones. Instead, they wear their armor on the outside, which is called an exoskeleton. Now, a true adult insect always has three distinct body regions: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Crucially, they have exactly 3 pairs of legs, which are all attached right to that middle section, the thorax. They might have wings, and they usually rock a pair of antennae on their head. So, if a professional inspector finds a critter crawling around in a dark basement, they're essentially going through this checklist in their head. 3 body parts? Yep. 6 legs? Yep. Okay, we officially have an insect on our hands.
But you know, just finding the adult is really only one small piece of the puzzle. Insects actually change shape as they grow through a process called metamorphosis. And effectively tracking a suspect means you have to understand how they grow up. The source material outlines 2 main types we need to know. First, there's simple metamorphosis, which is just a 3-stage process: egg, nymph, and adult. Those young nymphs basically just look like miniature versions of the adults, usually just without fully developed wings. But then you have complex metamorphosis. Now this is a full 4-stage process: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. In this cycle, the insect completely transforms. The young look absolutely nothing like the adults they'll eventually become.
To picture what this looks like out in the field, just think about a cockroach going through simple metamorphosis. The tiny nymph that hatches from the egg looks, well, like a small wingless roach. It eats the exact same food, it hangs out in the exact same cracks and crevices as the adults do. But contrast that with complex metamorphosis. Think flies, moths, or beetles. A beetle larva, which we'd usually call a grub, basically looks like a worm. A fly larva is a maggot. They live in completely different environments and feast on totally different food than the winged adults they're going to turn into. This is an absolute game changer for a pest detective. Because think about it, if you're trying to eliminate a fly infestation, just setting out traps for the flying adults isn't going to solve the root problem if you haven't actually tracked down the decaying matter where the larvae are actively feeding and growing.
Moving on to Section 2, Spiders, Ticks, and Relatives.
We've got to quickly draw a hard line here between true insects and arachnids. Remember our insect baseline from earlier? 3 body regions, 6 legs, usually possessing wings and antennae. Well, arachnids, which belong to an entirely different biological class, basically throw that entire rulebook out the window. They only have 2 body regions, they boast 8 legs as adults, and they completely lack wings and antennae. So a pro tip? If you see antennae, boom, you can instantly rule out a spider or a tick. When you get up close to the anatomical evidence of things like spiders and hard ticks, you'll notice their head and thorax are actually fused together into one single region. That's called a cephalothorax, which is then attached to the abdomen, and if you count the legs, you'll spot 8 of them. These visual cues are absolutely essential for a professional. A tick, for instance, just isn't going to respond to the same biological management strategies as an ant, because biologically speaking, they are worlds apart. You absolutely have to know your suspect to choose the right strategy.
All right, Section 3, Integrated Pest Management, or IPM.
IPM is really all about common sense, contextual decision-making. Before even a single drop of pesticide is ever considered, a professional has to ask a very fundamental question. Is this thing really a pest, or is it actually just an out-of-place beneficial organism? And this brings us to the concept of an action threshold. A threshold is essentially the level of pest damage, or the specific number of pests, that requires action to prevent unacceptable injury.
So for example, a homeowner might have zero tolerance for seeing a single cockroach in their kitchen. That hits the action threshold immediately, right? But what about mice? Mice inside a house definitely require intervention, but a few mice out in a sprawling rural barn? That might not require any control at all. In this business, context is literally everything.
So how do professionals navigate all these contextual clues? They follow the 6 steps to IPM. And this isn't just some dry checklist, it's practically the life cycle of a successful investigation. It all kicks off with educating the customer, really figuring out their tolerance levels. Then it's about analyzing the exact problem, identifying the species and its biology, just like we did earlier. Only after that do you take short-term corrective action, which might mean using a specialized vacuum or a very carefully targeted pesticide just to knock down a severe, immediate infestation. But the job's not done yet. Step 4 is long-term preventative action. We're talking caulking cracks, fixing window screens, improving sanitation to completely remove their food sources. And finally, you evaluate the results and report back to the client. It's this continuous, highly coordinated, and environmentally sound loop.
Next up, Section 4, precision targeting and tools.
Now, professional pest control relies heavily on highly specialized equipment that is designed to put the exact right material in the exact right spot. Mapping different applications to the correct tools is crucial. If a detective knows that pests are hiding deep inside expansion joints or behind baseboards, they're going to use what's called a crack and crevice application. This typically requires a compressed air sprayer fitted with a pinpoint stream nozzle or a specific injector tip on an aerosol can. You certainly wouldn't fire up a massive power sprayer for that. On the flip side, if they're dealing with exposed crawling insects deep in a crawl space, they might use a hand duster to float a really fine layer of insecticidal dust into those hidden voids. Selecting the correct tool is honestly just as important as selecting the correct management method.
But here's the thing. Having the ultimate tool is practically useless if it's not calibrated correctly. Think about this very basic metric. 128 fluid ounces equals 1 gallon. This simple conversion highlights a massive, massive part of a pest professional's job, which is strict mathematical calibration. If a product label legally mandates applying exactly 1 gallon of finished spray per 1,500 square feet, the technician literally has to calculate exactly how fast their specific sprayer nozzle outputs that liquid, measure the exact square footage of the room, and do the math to ensure they are physically walking at the precise speed needed to lay down exactly that amount. No more, no less.
There's a quote from the source material that hits the nail on the head regarding why this exact precision is absolutely non-negotiable. It states, "Too much pesticide may result in environmental and human health problems and waste money. Too little pesticide results in poor pest control." And that right there is exactly why it's called precision targeting. If your equipment isn't dialed in and calibrated, you are either actively endangering the environment or you're just flat out failing to solve the client's problem. It is a razor-thin line that demands total mathematical confidence. Finally, Section 5. Let's put it all together with a case study on termites. So, termites cause massive structural damage across the world, but they are constantly confused with ants, especially when they swarm in the spring or fall. Biologically speaking, you can easily spot a termite by its straight, bead-like antennae and a broadly joined waist. Honestly, it looks a bit like a thick tube. An ant, however, has bent or elbowed antennae and a very narrow, pinched waist. That biological ID, that is step 1. Step 2 is looking for environmental evidence, like mud shelter tubes built along a foundation wall. Subterranean termites actually construct these little mud highways to protect themselves from drying out and from natural predators while they travel from the soil all the way up to the structural wood of a house. Ants definitely do not build these. So if you spot a mud tube, you know exactly who your suspect is.
But wait, the investigation goes even deeper because, plot twist, not all termites are the same. In places like Washington State, professionals deal primarily with dampwood and subterranean termites, and their unique habits dictate entirely different IPM strategies. Dampwood termites are pretty large. They attack wood that is already wet from leaks or poor ventilation, and they live completely inside the wood. A massive clue for these guys, they leave behind these very distinctive hexagonal fecal pellets inside their galleries. Subterranean termites, on the other hand, are smaller, and their actual nests are buried down in the soil. They're the ones building those mud tubes we just talked about to commute up to the dry structural wood. Managing dampwood termites often just means fixing a plumbing leak and replacing the ruined wood so they dry out and die. Subterranean termites, however, require complex soil treatments or specialized baiting systems. Once again, specific identification dictates the specific action.
And just like that, we've reached the end of our investigation. We have gone from counting legs and checking for antennae all the way to understanding how insects grow and applying exact mathematical formulas to safeguard our homes and our environment. The unseen world around us is deeply, deeply complex and perfectly structured. So I'll leave you with this thought. Next time you see a swarm of bugs buzzing near your foundation, or maybe spot a mysterious dust pile in your garage, will you just see bugs, or will you know exactly how to investigate? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep observing and definitely keep asking questions.